Oh yeah, yeah, I don't need it. Let's see. It's a DC object. So if we go ahead and look over the schema, object classes, the DC objects have one thing. They must have a field of DC. That's it. That's all they got. So there's that object class in detail. May have a description, search guide, Fromers, I guess. Yeah, must have country. Account, must have a user ID. May have all these details. Domain. That looks like a business domain, not like a department. There's a DNS domain. So. Right. Yeah, it's once you have that, and that's the big thing.
Okay, cats, that's been 5 minutes actually.
Okay. And so by going through the information for LDAP, I can use this user administrator role. Okay, everybody hydrated or dehydrated depending on the need? Okay, cool. So nobody's sleeping yet, which is either a good sign or a bad sign, depending on what you were looking for when you came. So let's get into the demos. And at the beginning, I mentioned I'm a system administrator. The things that get me excited are a bit weird. I know. So I think this is the most exciting part. But you may have preferred the part at the beginning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install LDAP. Okay, that doesn't make any sense. I'm going to install an LDAP server. That's a typo there. I'm going to use Open LDAP. And then I'm going to add a user to that server using a program I like called JX Explorer. I really like it. It's a great LDAP client, point-and-clicky LDAP client. And it's a great way of doing little hacks against your LDAP. Change this, change that. Take a peek here, take a peek there. When you're doing one-offs. And then I'm going to load a bunch of people using an LDIF file because, frankly, typing all of their names in by hand would be a pain, and I had them all in a text file. So I wrote a little script that took their names and generated accounts for all of them. I didn't catch your name. What? Becky? And so, Becky, do you do bulk uploads of users into your directory ever? Yeah, and do you have a little VB script that takes a list of people from a spreadsheet and pumps out? Yep, yep, yep. Yeah, it makes it a lot easier, right? You could add them using the users and group utility, but not MMC, but you wouldn't want to. Okay, so this is all the mess these are my notes for me. So let's pop over to the terminal. Okay, so here we are at the terminal. And let me just orient you. So I have 4 tabs up here. This tab, you'll see up here, this is LDAP 1. And you'll see the command line says LDAP 1. I have another tab for another server called LDAP 2. And here, LDAP 2. And I'll try to describe when I'm switching between them. And then I have a third computer. This is called client. Why is that blinking whenever I push the button? Client. And command line, you see client. And then the last one is TimX220. This is my laptop. This is because I need to be able to interact with these other computers sometimes. And so this is my personal computer. So I'll tell you when I flip between them, but just be aware. So I've got 4 different computers. And if you're wondering how I'm doing that, over here I got VirtualBox, and I've got 3 VMs running on this machine, and then I have the machine itself. So I've got actually 4 copies of Linux running on this laptop. Bow before me. Okay. No, so it's not terribly exciting. But I just want people to keep track of that. I'll describe when I'm jumping from computer to computer, which could be physical, or in this case it's virtual. Paul, did you have a question? Okay. I'll raise it a little bit. Is that better? Okay. The problem is if I raise it too much, then I can't actually type anything on a screen. I'll do one more level. Okay. And I'll have to do that on each terminal. Okay. So okay. Okay, so the first thing is if we want to install an Open LDAP server, we need to install an Open LDAP server. So I'm using Ubuntu. You can use Yum if you're one of those people. I won't hold it against you. So the Open LDAP server is called slapped. I always found that amusing. It is, I forget, server LDAP or something like that is what it stands for. Or standalone LDAP server, I think. The standalone LDAP daemon. I think that's what it stands for. So that's its name. So you could install Open LDAP, but when you want to install the server part of it, you're installing slapped. And then I'm going to install a program called LDAP utils, because when you install the LDAP server, you don't really have anything to interact with it, to get data in and out of it. Like, it's just the server. You could connect to it and put things in it and take things out of it, but it doesn't kind of give you any command line utilities. So these are the little doodads that help you out with that stuff. So I'm going to install it, and it's going to ask me to configure it. I'm going to put in a bunch of junk there. Okay. So one of the problems, at least in the Ubuntu world, is that when you run the install, there's various thresholds of details of questions it's willing to ask you during an installation. And by default, it's a pretty low threshold. It only asks you major questions. But we want to configure this with a little more detail, a little more finely. So I'm actually going to reconfigure the package manually. I'm going to reconfigure slapped manually. And it's actually going to ask me a bunch of other questions, because the threshold will be much lower right now. It's going to ask me every question the configuration file could. And what the difference is before it made assumptions on answers. Now I'm making it ask me every question, and I'm filling in its assumptions. And this just makes it easier. It reduces the amount of manual tweaking I have to do with the service. Okay, so I'm going to go with the defaults here. This is kind of a double a negative, though, if you read this. And you're like, hold on, I don't know what this is about to do. Just No, don't worry. Just hit enter, just jump past it, and don't look back. So it asks you what the DNS name for your LDAP server is going to be. And I'm going to choose example.com. And this DNS name, you see that period. You could have www.example.com. Each of those periods separate chunks of a DNS name, a domain name, or a domain component, or a DC. See the pattern? Okay, maybe. And so now it's asking me the organization, and I'm going to call it example, just because it's an example. And an administrator password, I'm going to give it a trivial password. Ask me what type of database I want to use. I'm just going to go with the default. Do you want the database removed when you delete the LDAP service? I'm going to say no, so maybe I uninstall LDAP and then reinstall it with different settings or a different server later. Well, I'll still have that database that it left behind, or that directory. And it says there are files in this directory, probably because I did a previous installation of LDAP, so it's just going to move them out of the way because it's installing fresh files for me. It doesn't want, do I want to allow version 2 LDAP connections? And no, I don't. It's an old standard. Very few people use it. Okay, cool. So I have LDAP running, and if you look at things, there's the LDAP server running. Woohoo, done. I've installed LDAP. That was easy. So now the next thing is, now that we've installed LDAP, let's add a person to LDAP. So this is that program I was talking about, JX Explorer. I really kind of like this a lot. It's not perfect, but it's really a lot less sucky than other things I've used. So I'm going to connect to the LDAP server, and actually I pre-configured connections. So I'm going to connect to LDAP 1, and this is the IP address I have set up for that server. And in the beginning, when we were setting up the server, it actually mentioned something about creating a user account to manage information in that directory. So it has permissions to manage that information. And so I just copied that information over here. It's CN, canonical name, equals admin, DC equals example, DC equals com. Remember that bit with the periods? And then the password, the simple password. So let's connect. Okay, so we see a tree, right? There's the world, and the world is com, and of all the companies, there is an example company, and then here's that admin account. Okay, and you can see the admin has attributes and object classes and all super wonderful things. Here, let's go look at example. There's example, and example is DC equals example, right? So that's its RDN, it's here in blue. And you can see it implements an object class of DC and an object class of organization. And so that's why I had to type in an organization. That's why I had to type in that domain name at the beginning. Okay, so let's add a person, IT Ops. But before I add that person, I want to create a structure for that person, because this is going to be big. I want a lot of people in this directory. So rather than just stick people in underneath this example and just pile them up, it would kind of be messy. I want to start to separate things and organize my data into separate piles, right? I'll have people over here, I'll have groups over there when we're done with this. So in example, I'm going to create a new object, or a new entry, sorry. And I have to pick the object classes. So I am going to create an organizational unit, OU, which you could think of as a department or a subgrouping of people. And so, and for the RDN of that OU, I'm going to choose OU. And I'm going to call it users. Okay, that makes sense. So in the end, my DN would be OU equals users, comma, DC equals example, comma, DC equals com. Whenever I say example, DC equals, let's just say DC equals example.com, okay? This will just be a lot faster for everyone. And that's what I mean, that whole long bit. Okay, so I'm going to add that in. And it doesn't actually add things initially because it provides the screen so I can tweak it a little bit. Like I could, for example, description, example users, so I can tweak the entry before I submit it to the directory. Now I'm going to hit submit. Poof, it pops into the directory.
Okay, is there a list of allowable characters within the
Yes.
file?
I'm not going to get into that. Not going to get into that. But if you look at the object class has various attributes, and I think it's attribute types. Do I have that right? The attribute types have the specification on what the format of the value of that attribute must be. So if you have a phone number attribute, it will put certain constraints on what goes in that field. If you have a name attribute, it'll put a lot less constraints what goes in that field. Not going to get into it. I had to cut something. But okay. So now we have the world, com, example, and in there are users. Well, not really, because the users don't have anybody, right? There's no little turny downy thing there. So let's do something about that. So let's add a new one. I am now going to add an account. I'm going to add it to the object class of POSIX account, inet.org person account. This is just a common account type. Person. So this is an account for a person this is an internet organization type person, and it's going to be a POSIX account. This is a Unix style account. That's what POSIX is, a very scary sounding word. Just take POSIX and replace it with the word standard Unix. You'll get along just fine here. Now, the programmers might disagree, but it's about right. So I'm going to add, so they're going to be a person, and let's see, is there anything else? Nope, there's nothing else. Oh, organizational person, what the heck? Part of an organization. So this will bring in a bunch of attributes, and some of them I'll have to fill out. Oh, RDN, sorry. Details. And the canonical name, or the common name for this guy, is going to be IT Ops. You can put spaces in the canonical names, and that's fine. I like to avoid them because they're a little hard to type. Like later on when you want to refer to that record, you have to quote things to get that space into the quote. So I'm just warning you, try to make your RDNs without spaces and it'll make your life just a little easier. But if you have to, not a problem. It's really not that tough. It's just a little easier. Okay, so here's this record. Notice it hasn't been stored yet, so I can still fiddle around with it. Now, the thing you'll see is some of these are a little bolder than others. In fact, it's almost not, you really can't see it. In different fonts, it comes out a little more, pops. But let's just submit this. It'll say, all mandatory attributes must have values, exclamation point. So in other words, it won't let me store it unless I build all those must with something. So let's start. Group ID I know is a must. So I'm going to add it to the group 12,000. Home directory. Well, let's give it a boring home. Home, IT Ops. Surname, Ops, IT. First name, Ops, last name. User ID, IT Ops. So I'm kind of repeating the common name, or the CN here. They could be different, or they could be the same thing. I'm just making them different. User ID number. This is important because this came from when I made it a POSIX user or a Unix user. Unix users all have to have user IDs. So I'm going to give it a user ID of 12,000. So it's got a group ID of 12,000 and a user ID of 12,000. And these are actually all the required fields. And in fact, actually, you can tell they're the required fields because they go alphabetically and then it resets. You can see that, right? These are required because I was the U's and then I'm at the A's again. So, and I could go in and fill some more of these fields in. Like I think there's a user password field here. Yeah, I could put in a user password, for example. And I'll make it a salted SHA hash. So I could store, so these are optional. but now I've added them all. So now I hit submit. Unable to perform. I haven't seen this one before. Let's see if I can. I've got all of those things. Change class. Okay, let me simplify this. So I'm going to make it a person and that. Let's see. Okay, that's better. So what it looks like is some of my object classes conflicted with each other is probably what was the case there. So now I've stored this in the directory, and I didn't get an error that time. And now you can see inside of users, there is a user called ITOps, and it's got some attributes. And I can go in and change those or add them. Some of them are bizarre, like fax phone number. Well, frankly, who cares about faxes anymore? But when these standards were made, fax machines were around, so they added that attribute, and that's probably never going to go away because we want standards. We want things to work together smoothly and reliably. So they can ignore the field. That's fine, but it has to be there. It has to be available. Exactly. Yeah, he was saying the day you take that out, somebody will come to you with a big pile of money and say, you can have it if you can do it by fax. So we've added now a new entry, right? This entry is a child of the entry users. And let's see, it doesn't show the DN here, but the DN, we can infer the DN is CN equals ITOps, OU equals users, CN equals example.com, right? Okay, so we added one user, but that's a bit tedious. So I've come up with a better way. Clear. Okay. Yeah, cool. Okay. So I created an LDIF file. And it's got a bunch of users in here. And it's got all those attributes and the object classes they need to be part of. So you guys can see all that, right? Okay, cool. So now there is a command called LDIF modify. This is a command line version of the GUI I was using. It talks the same protocol, but it allows me to do it via text command line.
Just realized what the virtual desktop you're on right now
Isn't
isn't sharing the thing that you're working on.
sharing the video?
So could you shift that over to the other desktop, or is that going to break everything?
Let's see. Maybe I can get rid of the other desktop. Let's move that. Yeah, let's move everything down to the secondary desktop. Well, so hopefully that helps.
I think it's just got to overlap the one that's on JExplorer.
This is the one on JExplorer.
What's going on there then? I'm not getting any updates.
Well, I apologize, but the demo must go on. So, okay, so I'm on LDAP 1. That was that server I just installed. I just added ITOps. And so I'm going to use this IT modify command. Let's see. Or LDAP modify command. Here, okay.
It's just that AC. That's what it was.
Okay. So LDAP modify, and I'm passing a bunch of command line options. You're welcome to read the man page, but essentially I'm just saying I'm connecting with a password as this user, admin, this is the DN of that user, capital D there, admin example.com, and I'm connecting to the server on this host, and if you don't specify a server, it assumes the local machine. It's kind of weird, I think. I could put 127.0.0.1 here, or localhost. And then for the file here, I'm actually going to give it LDIF1. So that file I was showing you with the people in it, so I'm saying load those commands in to this server using that user account. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm going to type in the password. Boom. So let's pop over there. So I'm going to go over to users. I'm going to hit refresh. Whew. There are users. That was easy. A lot faster than typing them all. So if you have some sort of file or a spreadsheet with a bunch of people in it, you can go ahead and write a little script to kind of punch out those LDIF files and then bulk upload them. It's a lot faster than transcribing them by hand. You might recognize some of these users. Okay, so that's, let's see. What else? Oh, so I have all these users, but if we're going to use a Unix machine, we also need groups, right? All these users, you'll see, if I look at Brian Mulroney, you'll see he's part of a group, 1300, which there is no group defined. And IT Ops was part of a group, 13,000. And IT Ops was part of a group, 12,000, but there's no group defined. So I actually have another LDIF file. If you look at LDIF2, here's some groups. So I created an OU called groups, and in there I have created POSIX groups for those users. So let's go ahead and run this command, except now I'm going to pass it that second list of entries to add to the LDAP. A group is just a type of entry, right? Password. Okay, so I added those groups. You can see it added groups, and then it added things underneath groups. So if we go back over here and we go to example and we refresh it, look, I have users, I have groups. So I have a staff group, which is the 1300 group, and I have a IT Ops group. This is for IT operations, right? This will be a shared account, so that's why, I've got it set up like that. Okay, so I have a question. The server, if you have attributes or groups? If you have attributes in the LDIF file, well, here, why don't we do it? Copy LDIF1 to Delmi. Okay. So let's go ahead and let me delete everything from here onward. What am I doing wrong here? There it goes. Okay. So let's create a new user. Let's just get rid of the R's from Alexander's name. So now it's gonna be unique. And let's add a attribute that doesn't exist. Foo. Made of foo. Okay, so let's import that one. And what the LDAP server is going to say is, this doesn't adhere to the schema. You can't store it. So it says, additional info, foo, attribute type undefined. So it's not going to store something it doesn't understand. Make sense?
Can you still add without that attribute?
Oh yeah, I could add, no, it won't, an entry won't get added unless it's kosher, unless the whole entry is good. Yeah, and in fact, if you try to add an entry, and for example, maybe you specify its DN, remember? Let's look at that entry again. Here I have to specify the DN. So if, for example, I specify the DN of users that doesn't exist, there isn't an entry there, it won't create children unless they have parents. So it'll say, sorry, no parent to create this with. So it enforces all sorts of rules on how your data is structured. Make sure you don't make mistakes like that, which is Nice, because it keeps you from putting certain types of bad data in. I mean, you may give your child a bad name, but at least the child will have a parent. Okay. So that's great. We've got some data in there. Wow, that's exciting. So now what? Well, let's do something with this data. So let's use it as an address book. So I have Thunderbird running, and this is the address book in Thunderbird. I won't bore you with starting Thunderbird up. I just start in the address book. Okay, so let's go to Preferences. And here in Composition, in Addressing, you can have it look up addresses on a directory server. So let's add a directory server. So example.com is our directory server. The host name is going to be LDAP1 because that was the name of that server. I've added host records so we don't have to look at the IPs. And I'm going to go ahead and have a base DN of example and DC equals com. Well, so remember how we have this tree, this hierarchical tree. Well, when it searches the directory, you tell it what branch it should search under. So I could leave this blank and it would search under the entire tree. But rather than make it do all that work, when I'm looking for people, I'm telling it, actually, the base DN should be, sorry, I made a mistake here, should be users, comma, DC equals example, comma, DC equals com. So show me all the users and bring those up when I'm looking for addresses. So this trims part of the tree. It says what part, what branch or node. You know, when I'm looking for people, it describes which phone book I want to look in. You know, if I'm looking for my friends, I don't want to grab the city phone book. I want to grab my personal phone book. And so this helps with that. It just makes it a little more efficient. And in some cases, you might not have permissions to look at, say, example.com, but you can look in the users section. So it skips down to there where you have permissions to do that. So I'm going to do that. Oh, yeah. Count. You know, I'm a much smoother typer when I'm at home. Oh, yeah. So I need to save these. And I'm going to edit this. Actually, I'm going to, cool. So I told it to download the directory. So what it did was it scoured that branch of the tree and brought it over to the local computer. The advantage of that is that if I was typing email while I was offline, it would still be able to do it. You could do all the directory searches live. This was a great way to check that I typed in all that other information correctly. Now, one thing you notice, I have no security. I haven't typed any username or password to access the directory. The directory is just open to the world for reading, but not open to the world for writing. You need an account to write something to it, but everybody can read from it. Okay. So I've added that directory, and close the settings, and here's example.com. Okay, there's the settings. Now, there's something funny about Thunderbird, which is that it won't show you entries from a directory entry unless you do a search. So I did a search for a space, and look, there's everybody. I can click on that person and send them an email. Well, that was easy. Neat, nifty. So now Thunderbird has a object class that you can extend your schema with so that you can get all of the details that Thunderbird likes to store about people. You'll see that if I click on this person and I show properties, you know, a lot of these are blank because I haven't stored information in the right places where Thunderbird would look for it. So just warning you about that. The other thing is if I had specified an account here, if I had specified bind DN and then it would have asked me for my password, then I could have actually used this as a read-write address book. So imagine you have a family who wants to have a centralized address book for the entire family. You could do that. You could run an LDAP server, everybody's web browser or everybody's email programs point at that server. Everybody can log into that server and edit entries in that, so everybody could read and write the same entries and use a collective address book. Okay, so that's neat. That was useful, right? You guys use address books, right? Okay, cool. So now, I said I was a system admin, and the things that get me excited are a little different. I like it when users can log in. I'm a big fan of that. So, so let's use it to help people log in. Well, now this is a lot more complicated than the address book. So the first thing we need to do is to get the operating system to recognize these user accounts so that when they log in, they can get security credentials and have directories they can move through, edit files, things like that. So in the Unix world, we have user IDs and group IDs. Everything that's running on the server has to have a user ID and a group ID in order to operate. So we need to get the operating system, in this case Linux, to recognize users that are stored in that DIT, in that directory. Okay, so what do we need to do? And then after we do that, we need to get the program that the person's going to use to log in to actually recognize their user account. This is a little weird to think about, but when you log into Linux, say with SSH, you're not connecting to the operating system per se. You're connecting to a SSH server who's authenticating you and then passing you into the operating system. So you actually have to get SSH, in our case, in the example I'm doing here. You have to get SSH to acknowledge those users too. And there's two different ways to do this. So the first thing is to get the operating system to recognize users. We have something called NSS, or Name Server Switch. You might not have heard about this before, and that's okay. What happened was, in the early days of Unix, you have that password file, right? etc passwd, password, but misspelled a little bit. And that's where all the users on that server are being stored. And you have a group file. Well, and then you also have this, at some point, they added networking. And they said, okay, we'll create this host file where all the computers you know how to connect to over the network will be listed. Well, as time moved on, they started centralizing this information. They created DNS so that hosts wouldn't have to be stored on, so each computer didn't have to have a host file of every host on the internet. There could be kind of a centralized directory of these. And they started creating services like YP, or later renamed NIS, Network Information Services, which allowed you to store your user accounts on a central server, actually something similar to what we're doing here with LDAP. So that those user accounts were available on all the machines in your network, so that you didn't have to create a user account for each person on every machine in your network. And if they changed their password, say, that password change would be reflected across all the machines in your network. So when this happened, the people who wrote servers, back then, Telnet was a big one, right? The guy who wrote a Telnet server, when he first wrote it, he said, well, check the password file to see if this person can log into this machine, if they're allowed in. Later on, when these network services came around, he said, well, this is annoying. I've got to now read the password file, but I've got to update my code to get it to check, sorry, backing. Let me back up a step. I'm actually on the next frame. So the operating system, when people log in and wants to display your username or wants to figure out what your group ID is, it would go look at the password file to find that out. And then later on, when these network services came along, NIS, it said, the people who wrote the operating system said, well, we have to write this little module to access that service from NIS. And they got a little freaked out. They said, well, what if people come out with new and unique ways of storing user information, like their user IDs and their group IDs? What if they decide to create LDAP or something else? So what they did was they came up with a standardized way of telling the operating system where to look for user IDs, where to look for groups. And that was called NSS, or Network Name Service Switch. It also specifies where you can look for protocol names, where you can look for network names, where you can look for host and that's where DNS comes in. So if you look in the NSS switch file on your computer, and every Linux machine is going to have that, you're going to see in there entries that look like this, like password, and it says to look for entries for user accounts in the password file, look in the files. And what that is this is a module that describes looking through the local file system. When you want to find a group, look through the files in the local system, same thing. When you want to find a password for a user, look through the files on the local system. And so files is actually a module. There is libnss_files, which looks on the files on the local computer. And then down below we have host, and it says look in the host file. That would look in etc host. And then it says, oh, and you can also use DNS to look for other computers. And what there's a libnss_DNS. So this is a pluggable module. You could write another module to create your own service. You could have files, and then you could have Tim's directory service, TDS. And so you could create a libnss_TDS, and then in that module write all the code to go find things in a Tim directory service. But in this case, we're using something fairly standard, so it's LDAP. And what do you know? There is a module for LDAP that allows the operating system to use this module to access information in an LDAP directory. So we're going to use that. We're going to install the LDAP NSS module. So remember libnss, libnss LDAP. So there's that name. And then we're going to go ahead and edit the NetSwitch file. And actually, files is kind of an old-fashioned standard. Nowadays, they list a module called compat, which kind of does what files does, but has some extra functionality to make it compatible with some tweaks that NIS added to things, which I won't get into. But we're going to change it from compat on its own to compat and then LDAP. And so this is an order of operations. What the operating system is going to do when it's looking for a user account in the password file is it's going to check the compat module to see if it knows about it. And if it can't find it, then it'll check the LDAP module. And if LDAP module can't find it, it'll return an error. Does that all make sense? Okay, cool. So I'm going to install this module, and then I'm going to configure the LDAP configuration, because this module uses LDAP, so I needed to tell that module where to find information. I need to tell it the LDAP server to look on, what the base of that server is, where to search in that server, a user account to connect to that server with, and I also needed to tell it where to find the password information, the shadow information, and the group information. And so this gives the DN for that stuff. And that little question mark sub tells it can search subdirectories or sub entries under that DN. So not just for the people in that DN, but if any of the entries in that DN are parents, it can search their children and so forth and so on. So let's go ahead and get this installed. Okay, so let's clear the screen. So apt-get install libnss, so libnss module to support LDAP. Yep, and it's going to bring some other stuff along with it. We'll just let it bring it along. And so now this libnss brings some other stuff, and the other stuff needs to be configured. So it wants to know where my LDAP server is. And it's on the local machine. So if I leave it like this, it'll find it on the local machine. Or I could type 127.0.0.1 if I wanted to. Now it's going to ask me where in the LDAP directory to kind of vaguely look for stuff. Not in detail, but vaguely what part of the directory. And the reason why this is important is you could have a federated directory where you have one root with lots of different LDAP servers contributing different parts of that root. And so this allows you, for example, maybe you want that search to be constrained to one LDAP server's particular chunk of that root, so that points you at that subsection of that That's why this is being, it seems like it's asking you the question twice. It's to support some more flexible configurations. Okay, use version 3. Make the local root database admin. So the reason why it's asking me this question is that you can change your password on a computer. And if the password isn't being stored on this computer right here, maybe it's being stored in an LDAP server. It needs the ability to change stuff on that LDAP server. So you might not, if you don't trust your endpoints, the things that this is being installed on, I would say, no, I trust this endpoint. So I'm going to say, yeah, sure, you can go ahead and change usernames and passwords on this server. And it's going to say, does it require a login? Yeah, I'm not that stupid. And so it requires me to give the DN for the account that will be used to log in. So it is, remember, it was admin@example.com. Thank you. That would have taken me a little while to track down. And it wants to know the password of that. And so now it's going to connect.
I think you may have specified example.net earlier.
Did I? Okay.
As your base DN, or as your base. So I think that's going to be not configured correctly.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and look at the configuration file because I can. Yeah, and so configuration file has all sorts of stuff in here, and it's well commented. And my plan for that is I'm going to install a really a simplified version. Let's see, do I have utils? Oh, I don't have my simplified version. I'll just edit it by hand then. Oh, actually, since there's so many comments, I'm going to get rid of anything that is a comment, and get rid of anything as a blank line. So these are all the things that are configured in that file. The rest of it was all comments. Yeah. Yep. But actually, I'm gonna go ahead and write that to tell me. I'm gonna cat just to make this easier to read. So I'm getting rid of all the comments. And I'm actually going to replace the contents of this with the stuff from the slide, just because I know that this works. And rather than tempt the demo gods, I'm just going to walk right around them. Place base, okay. Okay, so I'm telling it where to look for the LDAP server, which is on, oh, sorry, I'm doing this on the wrong machine. My bad. I need to do this on the client computer. This is on the server. So let me do this one more time. So apt-get, let's see. Oh, apt-get install libnss and LDAP. Yep. And like I said before, I'm just going to go ahead and dump a configuration file in. And that was what I was looking for before. So I'm on the client computer. Remember, I have an LDAP 1, which is a server. I'm on the computer that's going to use that server to authenticate people. So people are going to connect to the client, and they're not going to have user accounts on client. They're going to be stored in the LDAP directory on LDAP 1. And so the client machine is going to ask LDAP 1, is this user okay? Should I allow them to log in? So there's the LDAP configuration. Here's the one I was looking for. So I'm just going to write that configuration over the configuration file that was created by that script. Just because, because that I know this one works. So I should be able to look. No, that's not doing. No, it's not working yet. What's... Oh yeah, thank you. Thank you. That's what I missed. So I forgot to add LDAP to this. So I configured the module to look for people in the right place, but I just didn't tell the operating system to use the module. And you can change these files, and the changes are immediately reflected. That's a good thing, in the sense you don't have to reboot or anything like that. That's also a bad thing, because it means you can lock yourself out really fast. So just keep that in mind. When you're editing this file, make sure that the ground you're standing on is not going to move. Okay, so let's... And look, Stephen Harper now has an account on this machine. But, and look, I'll just pull up, so if we look in the password file, we see he's not in there. But if we ask the operating system, hey, show me what password file you're using, you can see there's all that stuff from the password file up in the top here, right? All this stuff came from the password file up to, I think, HA cluster, right? Onward. Then all this stuff, starting with A. Mackenzie, is coming from the LDAP server. So you see how it's searching one and then searching the other to list all the information. And so, and I can do get ent group as well. And here's all the system groups right here. And if I scroll down to the bottom, system groups, system groups, system groups, system groups, and oh, hey, the IT ops group and the staff group down at the bottom. Neat. So now people can have accounts on this machine, but they still can't log in. So let's just try that out. So I'm going to SSH as S Harper, and I'm going to go to client. So I'm going to log into that LDAP client computer, right? And this is, I've switched over to my laptop. So I'm connecting from my laptop into that client VM. That client VM is checking LDAP 1 for user accounts. So if I try to connect, oh, that's going to suck. Oh, no, I have a typo. That's why. It's not. There, cool. Connect. So I'm trying to connect to Stephen Harper, and I know his password. Oh, actually, let me log in. I think I accidentally configured the next step. So, sorry. It wouldn't have normally let me log in, but I have Pam configured already. So, sorry about that. This should have said you can't log in because the SSH server doesn't know about your account. The operating system does, but the server doesn't. Yeah, it pulled in Pam as part of the requirements for libnss. So that's why. So sorry about that. Okay, so Pam, for anybody who hasn't seen the SNL program, hilarious character. Or no, Pat. Sorry, it was Pat on SNL, wasn't it? Pam would be a good one too. So PAM stands for Pluggable Authentication Modules. So remember, we had to let the operating system know about these user accounts. Now, the other thing is you remember how the operating system people kind of got caught with, oh, crud, people might want to store user accounts in different things. We need to provide a standard way. It was Solaris who originally figured this out. We need to provide a standard way of allowing the system administrator to configure where they're going to store their user accounts. So they created NSS. Well, the same problem happened for people who were writing servers. They needed to authenticate people. And initially, they did all the authentication manually. They just checked the password file, see if that person provided the right password, and let them in. Well, at some point, those password files started being stored in the same place that these user accounts were being stored. They were being stored in LDAP servers, NIS servers, in other places other than the computer, on radius boxes, for example. And so what they realized was, well, rather than making every person who writes an application that needs to authenticate users write support for every possible way that user might be authenticated and all the different permutations and tricks and whatnot, that it would be a lot easier if we created a standardized module. Here, let me just check the time. Oh, crap, we're running a little late. Okay. Modules. So they created PAM, which allows you to, the program goes ahead and says, I have a username and password. Hey, PAM, tell me, is it good? And then the system administrator, the same way with NSS, can be configured. PAM can be configured to support different ways of authenticating that username and password. So we're going to install the libpam module, which has already been installed. We're going to edit the configuration for the SSH server to tell it where to find its users. And then the big thing here is there's the session optional PAM make home directory. I'm going to tell it to create home directories for all the users. Because if you don't have a home directory, you can't, you get kind of, you don't have anywhere to put your files. You don't have anywhere to dump your stuff. And so I'm just going to, for the sake of this demo, I'm going to go to Stephen Harper's home directory. I'm going to blow it away. Okay, so now if I try to log in as Stephen Harper again, or wrong password. It says, it gives me this error, could not move to your home directory, no such directory. So rather than have that problem, I'm actually going to go ahead and on that client machine, I'm going to add that configuration. Let's see, PAM. Yep, okay. So vi etc pam.d, this is where the PAM configuration is stored. SSHD, I'm going to edit it. I'm going to open it, and I'm going to read pam.conf. So I'm going to read that configuration line in. And what this module, this PAM module says is that when somebody logs in, check to see if their home directory exists, and if it doesn't, make it. So that home directories get created automatically for users that are in that central directory. So now if we log in again, boom, it works. That directory was automatically created for us. Okay, so now we've got users logging in centrally, and centralization is wonderful because now they can change the password in one place and it shows up everywhere. And if they use a different computer, their account is there already. It just works. But it creates a single point of failure. Your LDAP server goes down, boom, everybody in the business is looking at you saying, oh, when is it going to be up, 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 when is it going to be up? And I don't know if anybody else works in IT. Big trick. Bag of chocolate. Keep it under the desk. People can't cry with chocolate in their mouth. Hand a chocolate bar to them. It'll shut them up, and you'll be able to focus on getting your work done. Okay, so that is what I'd like to cover next. Now the catch is, this is exciting. It's going to be a quick demo, probably about 10 minutes to run through the rest of it, but I know we're at time. Anybody want to see that demo, or just people want to see that demo? Okay. Okay, cool. I'll run through the demo quickly. Okay, so we need to cluster it. What we want is we want to make a high availability solution. What is that? You want to make it so that it's resilient in such a way where anything can fail and overall your service will still work. So what we're going to do is we're going to cluster it. We're going to make 2 LDAP servers. And we're going to have them talk to each other and synchronize the data between each other. You add somebody over here, it'll pop over there. You add somebody over there, it'll pop over here. So now we've got these 2 servers working closely. And if one of them, poof, disappears, the other one will pick up that workload and carry on. So your users will never be the wiser. They might notice their connection drops, and then when they hit connect again, it pops back up, but that's it. And in the case of LDAP, that type of connection refresh will be happening in the background. They won't even see it. So what are we going to do? We're going to have 2 LDAP servers that are replicating data against each other, but you got to configure people's computers to tell it where to find that LDAP information. And there are 2 servers, so which one? Like, okay, well, I'll configure all the computers to go to server 1. Oops, that's the one that broke. Crap, now everybody's down again. So what we're going to have is we're going to have an IP address. They call this a service IP, or a VIP, I believe sometimes they call it, which will be where those LDAP connections go to. And that IP address will be on one of those 2 computers. So this is going to be an active, passive. It's semi-active, but warm. Active and warm standby situation. So one server will be doing all the work, and the other one will be just waiting. Ooh, when you're ready, I'm here. Come on, when you're ready, I can, it's kind of like that guy on the bench, who never gets the bat, except when he does, and then he writes biography, and it's very exciting. Okay, so to get all this to work is not child's play. Like I said, I'm going to tell you how to get Pacemaker up. But the first thing I'm going to tell you for LDAP replication, time is important. Get your time synchronization out of the way right up front. Trust me, 10 hours later, I can tell you from experience, get it out of the way right up front. Use something to sync it. Don't just, I can't tell you what the exact precision is, but let's call it 100th of a second. Well, because you have transactions happening, in this case, on possibly both machines. And so in the configuration I've made, it's called a multi-master configuration. And they need to figure out who changed what first. And so the timestamps on those records are important. And if the 2 servers differ by a significant amount, then history can get weird, right? We've all restored backups that have weird time shifting things in it, or dealt with Java during the last time zone change. Okay. Yeah, well, and it depends on the drifting protocol. I can't give you an exact number, but I would say if you're going to install NTP, you might as well actually be accurate. Good enough.
And I can tell you that not with a current time sync can screw up the actual regular multi-billion-dollar operation.
Yeah, I can tell you that too. You technically have 5 minutes in the Kerberos stuff, but LDAP is going to be a lot more sensitive. Yeah, I believe you there. Even with the FSMO roles, you still have problems with that? Really? Oof. Okay, so we need good time sync. The next thing is we need a resource agent. So I'm using Pacemaker here to cluster these servers. And what it is Pacemaker is going to start up the Open LDAP server on each machine. And this is important. I'm having it started up because if they crash, for example, maybe LDAP crashes on one of the nodes, it'll restart it for me automatically. So it'll keep those services up. That's part of high availability. And then the other thing is it's going to control that IP address to put it on the right machine, whichever machine is going to be the current active machine. Well, Pacemaker doesn't know how to talk to LDAP servers by default. What it uses is these things called resource agents. The resource agent, what the Pacemaker cluster does is it says, hey, I want to start the LDAP server. Hey, Open LDAP module, start it. I don't know, just do whatever you do. Tell me when you're done. Tell me if it's okay. And so it has this abstraction that allows it to start very wide range of services without actually knowing the details about them, because it's the resource agent script that does that knows that detail. So there's a good resource agent script I found online, for the LDAP server for SLAP, I just downloaded it and installed it on my servers. I didn't bother with writing my own or anything like that. It's really very simple to write one, so I did that. So now the next thing I need to do, which might seem a bit odd, but remember how I was logging in and adding users and changing things on the LDAP server? Well, in Open LDAP, in the last few years, they decided that instead of storing their configuration in a file like everybody else, they really like LDAP a lot. They're going to store their configuration in an LDAP directory tree as well. This is for people who really love LDAP a lot. It's a big pain in the butt, frankly, to learn. But once you learn it, it works pretty well. But no, the big advantage of this, the reason why they did this, was because when you store configurations in a configuration file, it has to read that file to notice those changes. When they stored it in the directory, those changes are reflected immediately by the directory. So you can go ahead and connect to an LDAP server and tell it to change its configuration on the fly. And this is great for big organizations because you don't want to knock everybody offline while you restart your LDAP server. So instead, you can make this configuration change and it happens online and nobody's the wiser. Things go on, but they get suddenly new functionality. Say you add a new object class. You just load it in there while it's offline, while it's online, and it suddenly has that new capability, and you can just keep on running. So I have a configuration file that what it's going to do is set a user account that allows me to connect to that configuration DIT and make changes in that one. So we're actually running two DITs on this server. We've got the one with example.com, and we've got another one called cn equals config. So this is going to create a user account in cn equals config, and then after I do that, I'm going to enable replication. I'm going to load the module that provides replication functionality. I'm going to enable the sync overlay. That means I loaded the module, but that doesn't mean the module is actually doing anything. So I'm going to go to the DITs, and I'm going to say, no, I want you to use this module to do replication. And I'm going to configure server IDs so the two servers know their names so they can tell when they're talking to each other and who they need to talk to. And I'm going to add sources. I'm going to say to each server, I'm going to say, you can answer questions from that server for replication, and you should ask that server for things. So they'll start syncing to each other. And then finally, I'll configure the cluster to get all this stuff working in the cluster by disabling startup scripts and adding it to the cluster. Okay. So let's jump over to the example. So now I'm going to pop over to LDAP 1. And fortunately, I created this LDIF file to add that user account. So I'm in this weird tree. Like I said, just swallow and just go with it. It's weird, but it works. And so OLC online configuration. You see where they're going here. OLC root DN, OLC root password. So I'm setting a password for that. So, okay, so you see before I was doing the LDAP modifies and connecting to this example.com DN. Well, here is another one, except that it looks a lot different. I'm connecting to a different DN, a cn equals config DN. And so now I've added a user account to that. And so now I'm going to go over here, and I'll just show you. I'm going to connect over there. And poof, this is the configuration of the LDAP server. I can look at things like here's how access is controlled, and here's that username and password that I use to connect to the server. Okay, so I got that configured. Now I need to load the module, right? Remember I said I needed the load functionality? So this is another LDIF file. It says I want to load the sync provider module. And then it says for the configuration database, I want to add the sync provider module And here's some specifications on how it's configured, on the timing, on how frequently it checks and creates checkpoints in the data and sends them on. And then it says here, I'm going to give this server a name, and I'm also going to give the other server a name. So now I've given names for the two servers, so when I specify configuration, I can say where the from is and where the to is. And then finally down here, I'm doing something funny, and like I'm not going to get into great detail, but I'm saying that, hey, replication engine, on this remote server, on remote server 1, go ahead and get data from here using this account, this password, for this part of the data, and then how often you should do that and how aggressive you should be if you come across a failure. And then it says the same thing for 2. And the reason why both of them are specified, on a server, I'm specifying 2 sources. I'm saying sync against yourself and sync against the other guy. The LDAP server is pretty smart, and it'll discount itself. It'll say, I already know what I know, and ignore that one. So I can use the same configuration on both servers. Makes it simpler, because what this does is it says those configuration databases, keep them in sync now. So the 2 LDAP servers are actually configuring themselves, or coordinating between themselves the configuration. So they're sharing a configuration. That's important as a first step, because then the next thing I'll say is, okay, now share the configuration for the example.com data. So first I'm sharing the configuration, and then once I do that, it's a lot easier to add example.com, because I add it one place, poof, it pops out to both places. So okay, so I'm going to load LDIF4 over here, added that stuff. Now I'm on LDAP 1. I have my other server, right? I haven't done anything on that. Well, on the other server, I've already installed LDAP. I've already configured an empty database. It has no information in it. So now what I'm going to do is, on this server, I am going to load that configuration. So you remember I went ahead and loaded the modules, and I'm loading some sync for the configuration data, and I'm loading some sync for the example.com data. So I'm just going to go do that right now. And so I just combined the data from the other one. Oop. Oh, sorry. I hadn't installed the utilities. Remember how I said that the server doesn't come with very much stuff, like any utilities? So it didn't even have, a utility to modify the LDAP server. So just installed that. Poof. Okay, great. So now the 2 servers are synchronizing. Are we sure they're synchronizing? Well, let's do something. Let's go over here and let's make a change. Let's see, database config. Is there something I can do that... here. So I'm going to edit this. And what I am going to do for this is I am going to change this from a 5 to a 6+. So every 6 minutes, or 6 seconds instead of every 5 seconds. So I made that little change over here on that record, and now I'm going to disconnect and connect to that other one. Remember, I've never connected to the server yet before. Oh, did I start the service? Let's see. No, I didn't. Invalid credentials. Well, let's try blank. Okay, the demo gods are not with me. I did this once before and it worked just fine. Well, I'm going to cheat a little bit and copy the LDIF 3 stuff over to the other server. So that'll set a username and password. Okay, there. Oh, you know, that's a bunk configuration file, I think. Oh, no, no, there it is. So let's try this again. Oh, you know what? That's my mistake, because I didn't configure a configuration account or user account on this server before I started up synchronization. So when the remote server went in to log in to tell it, hey, I made an update, it couldn't. It got blocked. So what I'm actually going to do on this server is I'm actually going to just restart it from scratch. And that way, nope. I'm going to restart it from scratch again, this time typing in. So now it's starting with a blank database again, except this time I'm going to load a user account first so that the synchronization has a chance to work, and then I'm going to load the configuration to do the sync. Okay. And so let's make this 7 here. So this should cause it to push a change. So I was connected to the LDAP server number 2. I'm going to connect to server number 1 here. And sometimes this program hangs up for whatever reason, so you just have to go over there and clear that up. And there, you can see that 7 got pushed over from the other server. So the first server saw the update. The second server didn't see the update from the first server. So now that they're talking to each other, all wonderful and great, I'm going to go over to the first server and tell it to sync the user data. So all this was about syncing configuration. Now that I've told it to sync configuration, I can shove in the user data sync and it'll just pick it up on both machines. Oh, actually I shoved it in on the other machine, sorry. Because over here, it had that information actually in this file already. Sorry, I'm pointing at my screen, you can't see it. So now the 2 servers are syncing. So if I go back out to the LDAP directory and I look at something, let's say users, and I'm going to change this name. I'm going to add an extra N to his user ID because I'm cruel like that. And so now I'll connect to the LDAP 2 server, and you should see that extra N there. So let's look at Arthur. And there's the extra N. So now the 2 are talking to each other. Great. We have synchronization. Now we got to get clients to point at the right machine, right? So I have Pacemaker installed, so I'm going to go over to LDAP 1. When you're dealing with a cluster, you can make the configuration anywhere and it'll go out to all the other machines because that's what clusters do. It's kind of neat. So I have this configuration to add a service IP and to have the cluster start up the LDAP servers. But before I do that, I need to get the LDAP servers to be started by the cluster. Because if it starts it, then it can restart it on its own. If it doesn't start it, then it gets a little confused on how that service came to start and says, I'm not going to touch it because somebody else has been messing around here. They're very funky. So here I'm going to go ahead and remove the startup scripts for the LDAP servers, and then I'm going to stop the LDAP servers. So now LDAP should be down. on node 2. Sorry. And it's down on node 1. So now LDAP servers aren't running anywhere. There's no LDAP service. So I'm going to go in the cluster. I'm going to configure it. I'm going to edit the cluster configuration. And I am going to read crm.conf. So I wrote out the configurations ahead of time. So there's a service IP up here that's being specified. .10 is that my service IP. And here is describing how to start an LDAP server to that resource agent. So I'm telling the resource agent what it needs to know to start up its LDAP servers. And then this says start up the LDAP server on every machine, except that this one doesn't. So I'm actually going to, it was actually saying to not start it up in every machine. And then this last thing is collocation rule. What it says is don't start the service IP unless there's a server on the machine. What we would hate to have happen is a server crashes somewhere and the service IP is sitting on that machine. It's like the server says, well, hey, the service IP is still here. We want the cluster to say, oh crap, the service died over here. Move it over there quick before anybody notices. Okay, so, except the server really doesn't get that excited. I do, I'm a sysadmin. Okay, and committing that configuration. Okay, and we're almost at the end here. So what we see here is that LDAP got started. The LDAP service, this LDAP SLAP, is running on LDAP 1 and running on LDAP 2. And you see that the service IP is sitting on LDAP 1. If I look at, there's this extra IP address here, the .10. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how that works. So let's go ahead and connect to the cluster IP. Poof, hey, here's my LDAP directory. Okay, there's the data. So now let's go start breaking things. So I am going to go over to the LDAP server number 2 here. I'm going to pause it, essentially unplug it from the network. Now let's go back over here and connect to the LDAP directory again. Nope, still works. I can connect. Let me try to connect to LDAP 2. Nope, not going to work. It's dead. Okay, so let's go back and let's unpause that. So now I did pause the secondary machine, right? The service IP was sitting on LDAP 1. So that's not a very good test. So let's break LDAP 1. Let's see. Oh. Okay, so there it is. So let's connect to LDAP 2. Hey, it's working. Great. Let's connect to that cluster IP. Yep, it's still working too. So if we look, that server's down. We can see the cluster's detected that LDAP 1's gone offline, and it moved the IP address to LDAP 2, and the users, they didn't notice. Server went down. They can still log in. And that's it. That is the end of my presentation. I do have a couple things. There's copyright on some of the stuff I used. Read this, memorize it, quick. Okay, now this, quick. Come on, okay. And no, seriously, that doesn't fit on the screen for some reason. X500 standard, you were asking, Bob, I think, right? It's thrilling to go to their website. OpenLDAP, the software I demonstrated here. This paper, ldapcon.org, this Haferkamp paper, kick butt. Really awesome description on how to get this stuff done and little problems that you bump into along the way. I can't describe how wonderful this guy's paper is. All this stuff will be online thanks to Paul at some point in the future. And then LDAP for rocket scientists. The Zytrex people, they wrote a DNS for rocket scientists and LDAP for rocket scientists. both are not complete texts on those things, but they really get you a long way if you want to understand something. You know, you need the definition of a word, or you need the nitty-gritty details of that standard. Go there. They've got great stuff. And that's it. Any questions, problems, complaints?
It wasn't 10 minutes.
What is it? Oh, crap. Sorry.
Any questions? Follow us to the circuit afterwards.
Yeah. Let's get moving quickly. Sorry. Thank you, everybody, for your patience.